Han Solo once said to never tell me the odds. Well, we're going to do just that. We're going to tell you the odds about the Carolina Hurricanes for the upcoming 25-26 season on a Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockey Writers, also the co-host of the Surge Cast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. As you heard at the start of the show, odds have come out recently for the Carolina Hurricanes, spanning from the Vezina to win the Stanley Cup, Calders, Rocket Shards, what have you. All odds are out. Some guys have some interesting pathways to maybe win some individual trophies. But the main ones we're going to talk about the Vezina, going to talk about the Calder, and maybe some Selke and Rocket Richard odds. But before we jump into all of that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now, the Carolina Hurricanes recently put out the odds from a sports book. If you haven't checked it out, go check out the Hurricanes.com. It'll tell you which one specifically. But we're going by what the odds are saying for this one. So the normal, ones, divisions, Stanley Cup, stuff like that, make it the playoffs. Odds for the Canes to win the Cup plus 750, to win the Metro plus 125, to make the playoffs minus 900. So if you're gonna place one, you're not going to win a whole lot because it's almost a guarantee at this point. But like I said, the one we are going to talk about is the Vezina Trophy. This is the first odds we're going to be talking about. Frederik Andersen is actually a plus 6,500 to win the Vezina. Pyotr Kochetkov is a plus 16,000, which is kind of interesting to the fact that over the last 7 seasons, no other team has given up fewer shots on an daily basis than the Carolina Hurricanes with a 27.2. When you look at Frederik Andersen, his .915 save percentage over the last 4 seasons combined, essentially, 6th among goalies with a minimum of 100 games played. And you're looking at Frederik Andersen, who helped lead Denmark to qualify for the Winter Olympics, plus the fact that, his new one-year contract has a lot of incentives to win a lot of games and play in a lot of games as well. And, of course, when you're talking about Frederik Andersen, when he's healthy, he's probably, I would say, top 5, top 10 goalies in the league. So it's very interesting the fact that you look at Frederik Andersen, they put him as a 6,500, where it's a very good case to look at Frederik Andersen if he stays healthy and plays most of the season and gets most of the starts. There's a good chance that Frederik Andersen could really cash in on that. Now, on the flip side, you're looking at Pyotr Kochetkov. Like I said, Andersen's a 6,500. Kochetkov is a plus 16,000. Of course, this makes it really interesting in the fact that he has played a lot of the games for the Carolina Hurricanes over the last 2 seasons with Frederik Andersen being hurt, did a lot of the yeoman's work. And you guys heard me say it a bunch of times this offseason. In 89 games, he's won 50 of them. For him to possibly be within the realm of winning a Vezina, that's probably going to be the case again, where he's probably going to have to be the 1A, very close to the 1, if anything. And it's just finding that balance of being the aggressive goalie that we know he can be to being that more calm, cold, collected we kind of saw as the year went along. But the thing, too, is it's his high danger save percentage is ranked 92nd in the 92nd percentile among NHL netminders. So if he can find a way to keep his high save percentage numbers up, like it's a 92, 93, 94 percentile, but also find a way to find the balance of being someone who can be aggressive on the poke check and being more aggressive on angles and stuff like that, and cut down on the mental mistakes, and making those easier saves and not having a couple softies here and there. Who knows? There is a potential that even Pyotr Kochetkov might be in the knock on the door saying something for the Vezina. But it's very interesting when you look at the Carolina Hurricanes goalies, at least. And like I said, Anderson's a plus 65. Pyotr Kochetkov is a plus 16,000. So there is, as they say, so you're telling me there's a chance, but what comes with that chance and how are the odds going to be in their favor to possibly work? It seems like if Andersen stays healthy and he plays bulk of the games, he is one of those goalies that when he is healthy, he's probably one of the more dominant goalies in the league. I'd say definitely top 10. But the bigger long shot looks like possibly Pyotr Kochetkov, and the fact that even though he's won 50 games the last 2 seasons for the Hurricanes, could he have a season where those numbers reflect of him being able to stop a lot of pucks and not putting, probably putting some soft ones in there, or getting a little too aggressive or kind of too all over the place when it comes to looking at his game? Because the thing with that, when you look at what Pyotr Kochetkov can do, but mostly what Frederik Andersen can do, of course, you guys heard me talk about it a lot. 13-8-1, 950 save, 899 save percentage, 250 goals, 2.50 goals against average. Did have a shutout, but then when you look at Pyotr Kochetkov's numbers, and I know you guys are probably sick of me saying this, but take with a grain of salt with some of these numbers, especially how the back end of the season was. For Pyotr Kochetkov, at least, look at a guy who was 27-16-3 and 897 saving and 2.60 goals against. If he can get his save percentage up to 911, 912, 915, if he gets his goals against average back to where it was last year at 2.33, there is a possible case we made for at least Pyotr Kochetkov to do it. Like I said, for Frederik Andersen, it's just that his main thing for him is just staying healthy. And that's kind of the one things you really got to worry about is that a possibility? Because if Andersen can stay healthy and if he does most of the bulk of the starts, you can't really say that he has a legitimate shot of putting himself in a good position to go and win the Vezina. So it really just comes down to what avenue the Hurricanes go down when it comes to who's going to be their number one, who's their 1B, who's their 1A. It's just that's kind of the big question of who's going to be that. And I think that's where you start hitting those certain interesting numbers of which goalie is it going to be. That's kind of where I'm at for the most part when it comes to the Vezina. If Anderson's healthy, he plays out of his mind, he proves that he should be the number one or at least the 1A, then I think Andersen probably has the better chance of winning the Vezina. If Kochetkov can, like I said, cue the mental mistakes, maybe don't have so many, keep his high dangers high, saves high and stuff like that. And like if he gets his, like I said, save percentage around the 912, 915, 2.2, 2.3 goals against average, I think then there is a chance for Kochetkov as well. His is going to be a little bit more of a daunting run to go after just because of how kind of up and down he is a little bit. But I did say he has a good trajectory of his career. But in terms of who might have a better shot at it, it's probably going to be Frederik Andersen more than anything else because he's proven time and time again that when he's on it, he's really on it, especially the last 2 times the Hurricanes made the Eastern Conference Final. Who was the goalie in there for those 2 deep playoff runs? Well, it was Frederik Andersen. So it'll definitely be interesting to see when you look at the Vezina, who has a legitimate shot out of the 2 guys and who has probably the better odds. It's just who's the 1A, who's the 1B, and who's having a great season for the Carolina Hurricanes. Should definitely be one to keep an eye on. Now we're going to move on from the Vezina, and now we're going to talk about the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year. So stick around and we'll talk about the certain player that they've mentioned and his odds on a Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever really touching a spreadsheet. Maximizing investments, increasing your savings rate, easily viewing finances with your partner and or financial advisor, keeping a clear view of your financial health week to week and the long term. So don't let the financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONAHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. So we talk about the Vezina Trophy with Frederik Andersen and Pyotr Kochetkov, what their odds look like for those. This is going to be the real fun one to talk about, I would say. And I know a lot of people are very excited for this guy. It is Alexander Nikishin winning the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year. His odds plus 1,800. Now, as far as you're looking for individual players, Alexander Nikishin winning the Rookie of the Year does have a legitimate shot on that. Of course, he's 23 years old, played on the KHL for the last 6 years, the last 2 as a captain, 3 straight seasons with at least 45 points, including 56 and 23-24. Now, his 1,800 does sit tied 7th among eligible players at the moment with former teammate Ivan Demidov of the Montreal Canadiens with 220 that leads the pack. So right now, a lot of the odds makers are looking at Demidov being the guy to win the Calder at 220. But, like I said, Nikishin is tied with 7 other guys for the plus 1,800. Now, looking at Alexander Nikishin a little bit more, of course, 6'4", 216. This guy is built big for the Carolina Hurricanes. Left shot defenseman, 69th overall in the 2020 draft. Like I said, we talked about the points. 55 back in 22-23 as the with Scott St. Petersburg. 8 points in 16 playoff games. Was the captain back in 23-24. 56 points in 67 games. 1 point in 5 playoff games that year. And then last season was the captain for Scott St. Petersburg. Once again, 46 points in 61 games. 3 points in 4 playoff games. Of course, did play 4 postseason games for the Carolina Hurricanes, did have an assist, so he did get his first ever playoff point for the Hurricanes, not officially have his first NHL regular season point yet. Overall, not a bad showing for him in that one, but you look at a guy who is probably considered one of the best defensemen in the KHL history, and you look at his points, you're talking at least 45 the last 3 seasons, 2 55-point seasons, which is really good for a guy who was at that time 21 and then 22, and now he's 23, playing 3 years in the KHL. Even before that, too, a lot of KHL, VHL, MHL time between Spartak Moscow, kind of going through their system, then goes over to Scott St. Petersburg, absolutely starts lighting it up with them. His previous best season before that was with MHK Kryla Sovetev Moscow, 25 points in 62 games in the MHL. But this was back in the 18-19 season. And then even farther back, how about SKA Moscow back at the U16 team in 2016-17? 15 points in 31 games. So it did take him a little while to kind of, go through, being a defenseman through the MHL, VHL, have some stints in the KHL as well. Then all of a sudden shows him the Scott St. Petersburg and absolutely just pops off for 3 straight seasons. So the last guy to win the Calder for the Carolina Hurricanes was Jeff Skinner. So it's been a little bit since the Hurricanes have gotten one. And honestly, if there is a player to look at to essentially break the Calder drought for the Hurricanes, I think probably Alexander Nikishin is that guy. What makes it very interesting for him is the fact this is his first year on North American ice for the full season. Yeah, he's got some practice time, but you're talking 4 playoff games ever, and that's his experience. In the NHL is 4 playoff games. When you are in Game 5 of elimination to knock off Alexander Ovechkin of the Capitals, and then you play 3 games in the Eastern Conference Final against the now 2-time defending Cup champion, the Florida Panthers. So that's your welcome to the NHL, kid, and it's going to be in the playoffs, which is like another level to what the regular season is. So this is going to be his first full season playing in the NHL, and of course he has been learning some English on the off season. He's still getting ready for the season to come as well. And of course, we all know some of the guys are back on the ice: Logan Stankoven, Sebastian Aho, Jordan Stahl. There are some guys back. I think even Jordan Marnick's back too. So there are some guys that are back already because we got camp not that far away. We're looking at next week. But for Nikishin, it's, what's the learning process going to be like for this guy? Because like I said, he's, still learning English. He's not fluent, but he's getting there. It's going to take him a little time to get to that. But he still has to get used to North American ice because, like I said, you're talking 4 playoff games, and that's his total experience. Now you're going to what a full season looks like for him. So I think, there probably will be some growing pains because, one, it's already tough as a defenseman jumping into the league like that and learning the Hurricane system. And 2, you're talking language barrier. And 3, his experience on North American ice is not it's very small sample sized. So, like I said, his numbers aren't terrible in terms of odds. Like I said, 1,800 isn't really bad. Yeah, his former teammate for the Montreal Canadiens, Demidov, is a plus 220. But, of course, that's just looking at Nikishin and being like, oh, he might be okay, but we don't really know because he's a wild card. But it's kind of a good thing because now you're like, okay, now we get to see what kind of a fun season he can bring and surprise a lot of people. Like, wow, okay, this kid is really good. Like, his numbers in the KHL are legit. He's been playing really well for the Hurricanes. So I think this is going to be a really fun one to watch in terms of the Calder because I think Nikishin has what it takes to maybe make some noise of being the guy to possibly win the Calder. It's just, what defensive pairing is going to be on, who's his teammate going to be, his minutes, his roles outside of the 5-on-5. Are we talking penalty kill? Are we mainly talking power play? It all really depends on what Rod Brind'Amour and what Tim Gleason think is the best case option, best case scenario for this guy. So it should be definitely exciting to watch, at least to see what Nikishin can do. I think he's going to do really well, in his rookie season. It's just, what are, because everyone's going to look at the points. Everyone's going to look at, okay, how many goals is he scoring? How many points does he have? What's his average time on ice? What's his plus minus going to be? I'd say, a lot of patience is going to have to happen because we all know it's tough for defensemen already in this system, in learning, playing in the AHL in general. And now you're adding all these other components of very limited experience on the ice, language and stuff like that. So it's good. There's going to be some growing pains, but I think he'll come out just fine. Do I think he's going to be at least a finalist? I do think he's at least going to be a finalist. Could he win the whole thing? It all really depends on how his season goes and how everyone else does in the Calder running as well for all of the rookies in the NHL. But I definitely say I feel pretty good for the odds that comes to Alexander Nikishin win the Calder. So it just depends on, like I said, what are his usage going to be? What's his contributions off the score sheet and on the score sheet too? Because those are going to be some very key factors to see what Alexander Nikishin can do for the Carolina Hurricanes. But overall, like I said, if, like I said, odds plus 1,800 to go and do something like that. So it should be very interesting to see how Alexander Nikishin does in his first full pro season in North America, and especially with the Carolina Hurricanes in the NHL. But like I said, definitely one to watch, and it'll definitely be exciting to catch as well as the season goes on. So we talked about the Vezina, we talked about the Calder. Now we're going to talk about the Selke and the Rocket Richard, but this in particular is for one player because I think this guy is on a trajectory to have a career season in his 5th year in the league, which is already crazy to think about after having back-to-back 60-point seasons. Stick around. We'll talk about that here in a second on a Wednesday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. Maybe you're watching the Carolina Panthers. Maybe you're watching the Minnesota Vikings. There's a lot of teams to keep an eye on, or even it's just your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to Sundays. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to a segment 3 of Locked on Hurricanes, your team every day. All right, so we talked about the Vezina, we talked about the Calder. Now we're going to talk about the Selke, Richard odds. There were some guys that were mentioned for these ones for the Carolina Hurricanes. We'll go through them real quick, but we're not talking about the main guy. So talk about the Richard, Andrei Svechnikov plus 30,000, Sebastian Aho plus 6,000, Jordan Staal also plus 6,000. But the guy I'm talking about for both these trophies, Seth Jarvis. Now, like Aho and Staal, Seth Jarvis is also a plus 6,000 for the Selke when it comes to the Carolina Hurricanes, but the Richard, 15,000. So his actual Richard odds are better than teammate Andrei Svechnikov's, which is crazy to think about. So, looking at Seth Jarvis last season, he did get some Selke nominations. He finished 12th last year in the Selke votes. The season before, where he finished 20th in the Bing votings, he actually finished 8th. So the last 2 seasons, Seth Jarvis has finished within 12 to 8 in the Selke votes. Of course, that's back-to-back 67-point seasons. 23, 24, 33 goals, 67 points in 81 games. That's with him playing over 60 games with his shoulder being torn. 13 power play goals, 9 game winners, 18.45 average time on ice. This last season, how about 7 power play goals, 5 shorthanded goals, 2 game winners, average 19 minutes and 21 seconds, which is the most ever for his career. Like I said, finished 12th in Selke votings. This is where I think the Selke voting is probably a little bit better on his odds on the side. Yeah, the Richard would be great for Seth Jarvis because, like I said, he's had 33 and 32 goals the last 2 seasons. But are you talking about, and even points again at 67? Can he get the points? Can he get the goals? I'm not really sure when you look at other guys across the league. That's why, unless he goes on a ridiculous run, maybe that's where you do see the 15,000 coming into play because, okay, this guy's he's absolutely taking off. He could have a chance to win the Rocket. However, when you're looking at the Selke at plus 6,000 along with Aho and Staal, I think Jarvis has what it takes to get the Selke at least because, like I said, you're looking at finishing 8th 2 seasons ago in his 3rd year in the league at 21. This past season, his 4th year in the league, he's 22, gets 12th. And he's only progressively gotten better every single season. Because, like I said, 96 goals and 213 points in 304 games is pretty dang impressive for a guy who's already a plus 56 for his career. 22 power play goals, 8 shorthanded, 15 game winners in 304 games. And he's averaging 17 minutes and 7 seconds, and that's after 1921 last year. You've seen it as his career progressed. First season, rookie, trying to get used to the league, he's 19. Second season, 20 years old. Took 1 less point overall, but you saw him working on his defensive game because that was the plan for Ryan Brennamore and his staff, was to get his defensive side of his game up to make him a complete two-way 200-foot player. All that accumulated to what you saw in his 3rd year in the league where, boom, he goes off from 39 to 67 points, a 30-goal season out of Seth Jarvis in his 3rd year in the league. Like I say, he goes and finishes 8th in the Selke, finishes top 20 in the Lady Bing voting, and he follows it up while missing 7 games this past season, still hit 67 points and set himself up to have a career high in assists with 35. 34 the season before, 35 this past year. And like I said, back-to-back 67-point seasons. Now, this is a guy who's not playing all top-line minutes. First, second, third as well. PP1, penalty kill unit. Heck, he's even taking faceoffs for the Carolina Hurricanes. That's what Seth Jarvis has become. I think that's why you look at him being probably a very underrated Selke guy, a very underrated two-way 200-foot forward who's gone from just offensive minded only to being, like I said, one of the up-and-coming two-way guys who can beat you in any situation, scores on the power play, scores shorthanded, scores 5-on-5, is a spark plug on any line you put him on. That's why, for me, if there's an award for Seth Jarvis to get this season, yeah, Rocket Richard would be absolutely amazing for him to get that. But I think a Selke is definitely a possibility. Of course, now you look at Jordan Stahl and Sebastian Aho, two teammates who are definitely two-way guys. They're plus 6,000 as well. So could there be a scenario where these guys are taking votes away from each other? Maybe. But if we see a season that Seth Jarvis has had, and if he stays healthy and the shoulder doesn't bother him, he could take it to a level where it's like 70, 80 points, complete shutdown on the PK unit, and what do you do 5-on-5? I don't see a scenario where Seth Jarvis isn't a nomination for the Selke. Yeah, it's going to be tough. We look at Alexander Barkov and all these other guys who've gone and won it a few times, but Seth Jarvis has put himself on the radar, at least for the last couple seasons. He's getting voters' attention with, okay, this guy's a very good Selke defensive forward who can still score goals too. Like that's the one good thing about his two-way game is he's not one or the other. He's not too offensive. He's not too defensive. He's got a good two-way game to his system. And he's good at shutting down guys as well. And like I said, with the PK, he can absolutely beat you on scoring goals. So if you look at a guy like Seth Jarvis, there's no way you can look at him and say, he can't win the Selke. There's no way. Actually, there is a good possible way he can. Yeah, he hasn't finished top 5, but he's at least finished top 10 once already. In his third year in the league, he's already going to his 5th season, which is crazy to think about. You're looking at year 5 for Seth Jarvis. Absolutely insane to think about, but that's just the maturity and just how good he is as a hockey player. He's going to be 23 this year, and he's going to be in his 5th year in the league already. Oh, yeah, and it's also the 2nd year of his 8-year contract. Like, there you go. But you look at Seth Jarvis, and like I said, Rocket would be great, but if there's a trophy I think that the odds are going to be in his favor for, that he has a legitimate path and a legitimate shot for, I think the Selke is the best one for him. So let me know what you think in the comments. How do you feel about Pyotr Kochetkov or Frederik Andersen for the Vezina? How do you feel about Alexander Nikishin possibly for the Calder? And for Seth Jarvis, do you see a Rocket Richard or more of a Selke in his favor, or maybe both? Who knows? But if you're on YouTube, let me know in the comments. And if you're on social media, hit me up at OneTrueZach. Let me know your thoughts on the Vezina, the Calder, and at least the Selke and the Rocket odds. Very, very interesting when you look at the players for the Carolina Hurricanes and what the odds are saying in their favor. Because like I said, in this instance, we are going to tell you the odds. And that's what we did on the Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. But that being said, this will be the end of the Wednesday show of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first update. Let's check out the Locked On NHL podcast. It's a off season, bringing you the daily league white stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep it with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is @L_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at @DZacharyMartin, where if you click the link tree in my bios, you can find all of my random content at the Hockey Bears. I've been putting out a lot of stuff as well. Just did one on Jordan Martinook. Now he's closing in on 100 NHL career goals and how I believe he could have another career season for the Hurricanes. And there's a lot more around that as well. A ton of different articles. Make sure to check that out. If you want to check out my other podcasts, the Surgecast, where you can find on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. for Locked On Hurricanes? Well, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review, because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notifications so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Wednesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Wednesday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.